Great to have you all here with us today. I know it's a busy time of year for everyone as we approach the holiday season, so glad you're able to join us. I think we will go ahead and get started. My name is Laura Schrake. I am the Senior Program Director of Business and Sustainability with the Council of the Great Lakes Region. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Business and Sustainability webinar series of our virtual Great Lakes Economic Forum. Today's webinar will look at smart manufacturing through an ESG lens. ESG, of course, standing for environmental, social, and governance. With concerns like climate change, social justice, and the unprecedented environmental risks on businesses today, companies are pressed to embrace sustainability as part of their business practices, and ESG continues to grow in importance across all industries, including manufacturing. We have two great speakers from Plex with us today who will share insight on this topic. But first, I want to introduce the Council of the Great Lakes region and give some context on the region for those who may be tuning in to our Business and Sustainability webinar series for the first time. So the Council of the Great Lakes region is a binational network of organizations supporting economic growth and environmental protection of the North American Great Lakes region. We connect diverse interests and sectors and cultivate a regional voice on sustainability issues and solutions. The Council serves as a convener and a platform to facilitate knowledge sharing, and we lead collaborative programs that are engaging businesses to help drive sustainable solutions in the Great Lakes region. Today's webinar is part of our Business and Sustainability series and links with the Council's work to build a network of companies who are aligned and committed to a sustainable region and to protecting the health of the Great Lakes region. The Business and Sustainability Network programming is supported by the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, and we're very appreciative to them for their ongoing support. Programs under our broader business and sustainability umbrella address key topics important to the region like circular economy, water stewardship, and decarbonization. And new program areas are under discussion for development. For the sake of time today, I won't go into detail on these programs, but we will put some links into the chat and would certainly be happy to share more information to anyone who expresses interest. So if you have an interest in the topics I mentioned, circular economy, water stewardship, decarbonization, as well as sustainable agriculture and food production, or any other aspect of sustainability in the Great Lakes region, please do reach out and get in touch with us. We are welcoming business engagement across these programs and the broader business and sustainability network. And of course, the more involvement we have, the greater our collective impact across the region. So about the Great Lakes, the region is significant in many ways, and we need to work collectively and collaboratively to protect the health of the watershed and its ecosystem. First and foremost, the region is guardian to the largest surface freshwater system in the world, holding roughly 20% of the Earth's surface freshwater. And the 5 Great Lakes are a shared drinking water source for over 40 million people in the US and Canada. And the lakes support more than 3,500 plants and animal species. From an economic perspective, the region's importance remains equally immense. For instance, if the Great Lakes Economic Region, which includes the 8 US states from Minnesota to New York and the 2 Canadian provinces, Ontario and Quebec, if this region was a country, it would be the 3rd largest economy in the world. It holds major industries generating business and provides over 50 million jobs, including the manufacturing industry, which employs more than 10% of the workforce in the Great Lakes. Today, we're talking about manufacturing, smart manufacturing in particular, and how smart manufacturing is helping manufacturers with their ESG objectives. A sustainable Great Lakes region must include leadership, commitment, and innovation from the business community. And that's where smart manufacturing can come in. Today's webinar will feature research from Plex Systems and Rockwell Automation that highlights how smart manufacturing is supporting companies in their corporate sustainability. We will hear from our guest speakers and then close the webinar with a Q&A session. So if you have questions during the webinar, please do type them in the Zoom Q&A box. We can jump in during the presentation to touch on a question if it makes sense to do so, or respond to it at the end. So I encourage you to put forward any questions you might have. And with that, it is now my pleasure to introduce this month's webinar guests, Gerry Abbey and Tony Kaczmarek, both representing Plex Systems, a Rockwell automation company that is headquartered in the region and a leader in cloud-delivered smart manufacturing solutions. Gerry Abbey is Plex's market research and competitive intelligence manager. He leads the annual State of Smart Manufacturing report creation and leverages data to raise awareness around the benefits of sustainable ESG policies across organizations. Tony Kaczmarek is Vice President of Product Management, focusing on Plex manufacturing automation. Tony was president of the recently acquired Coors Engineering and has over 25 years of domain expertise in controls and automation around shop floor and facility integration. So thank you both for being here with us today. I'm looking forward to your presentation and we'll let you take it over from here.
Thank you, Laura. It's great to be here. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I just want to touch on a couple points before we get started from Laura's introduction, that the region is an economic engine, and thinking about that, I really love the way you framed that we're in a new era of economic growth and environmental stewardship. It's not an either-or conversation. I think in the past, many people have thought of sustainability or ESG as an approach that bleeds money and is going to take away from that economic growth. And what we're going to talk through today shows that they are paired, and if anything, that if you lead with sustainability and ESG within your organization, it can actually be a catalyst for that growth. Before I jump in, Tony, did you have any opening thoughts or comments?
It's been fun from my perspective because I've been engaged in sustainability for almost 30 years now, and just watching the evolution, as you had mentioned, it's something that we see more and more integrated into the whole manufacturing mindset. It used to be something that was a very separate topic, but we're seeing it more and more now just be part of a blended conversation as part of the greater manufacturing discussion. So it's been fun seeing that escalate through the years and become more of a greater role in the business.
All right, thanks, Tony. Let's dive in here. So look at smart manufacturing through an ESG lens. And again, Gerry Abbey, market research and competitive intelligence manager here at Plex. I do a ton of research, including our State of Smart Manufacturing report, which will be coming out in February. Some of the findings I'll touch on today are from a preview of the 2023 report and findings from this past year's report for 2022. We're going to go through a couple of those key findings and then talk through accelerating into Industry 4.0, steps to sustainability, and taking action. All right, so we have this report. It'll be available to the audience. I think maybe a link in the chat, and they'll direct you to it. It's a great report with findings from 321 global manufacturers, touching on how technology is used by manufacturers today and how they're thinking about ESG and sustainability within their systems. One of the surprising findings that came last year was it was the first time we ever asked about ESG and sustainability, and the response rate was 97% of the respondents said that they had an informal or formal policy within their organization for ESG and sustainability. This year's report, the 2023 one, which actually is from 4 times the amount of respondents across a wider global sphere, reiterated 95% had a formal or informal policy for sustainability or ESG, just really showing how mainstream it is and how the case has been made that it's going to contribute to economic growth. And there's a lot of reasons pushing them to do it besides that. And touching on that are scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. To give a quick high level of these, scope 1 are emissions that come out of what you're producing. Scope 2 comes from what you're consuming. So utilities, gas, oil, electricity. And scope 3 is your upstream and downstream. So distributors taking your product out into the world and suppliers who are making pieces that are going to go into your product and all that goes into their production. Now, when we're thinking about that and then thinking about the stats from before about why companies would pursue ESG and sustainability, there are a lot of reasons that came back. And the top one was energy management. And Tony, I know you have deep experience with this. So could you help our audience understand why that would be the top point?
And I think, especially in the US, we got to cheat for a while with pretty low and inexpensive energy, especially in our region. But it's always something that is a contributing factor when you're looking at manufacturing. And it's always been something that people have looked into opportunities for saving energy throughout the facilities. As these energy prices escalate fairly rapidly over the last couple of years, it is certainly becoming a much bigger focus on, as the bigger picture of manufacturing and cutting the cost of parts and labor and all these types of things. Energy is becoming a bigger and bigger piece of that pie that people are paying attention to.
So much so. And I know in Europe, some of our customers have talked about the acceleration of utility costs really impacting them. Besides energy management, we saw recycling show up and carbon offsetting, carbon neutral, going back to that scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And we're going to loop back to that a little later, talking about some of the reasons that that is actually rising in attention in the 2023 report. Now, we've talked about the business reasons, but there's also human reasons that showed up very prevalently in the 2022 report and in the 2023 report as well. And addressing social inequalities, fostering a collaborative environment. All of these points over here tie into a higher level purpose. So that vision and purpose within the organization, so that people are feel that they're contributing to something beyond their daily task and what they're doing. And I want to highlight another one in here, a competitive differentiator. You can see on the bottom left of that human reasons box. That's risen this year in 2023. And I think many organizations are seeing that if they're ahead on sustainability and ESG policies, they're more attractive to the workforce that's out there. They're also differentiating in the lens of the customers and better prepared for some regulations that are in the pipeline. Now, moving forward, we're going to talk through accelerating with Industry 4.0. Everybody talks about Industry 4.0. We've been in it for over a decade. I've heard people talking about Industry 5.0. I think Europe has even drafted some preliminary reports identifying what it is and how we'll get there. And thinking about that, now we're really tying in the sustainability lens into this. And Tony, as someone that's really been immersed in smart manufacturing and automation, and also facilities management tying into that energy management and utility management going into scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Could you lead us into this section here, talking a little about how sustainability will come into play?
And I think a big part of this, we've been engaged in this industry 4.0, as you mentioned, it's been around for a decade, actually probably several decades for us. We've been doing this type of work with pulling sensors into, an environment that can be accessible just about anywhere. And really, I think where we've seen a lot, two major improvements is number one, with the cost and the availability and the cost of entry for these types of devices and equipment. But potentially even more important is providing better context around that. I think everybody's had the ability to track and monitor sensors for decades, but pairing that with context within the greater business is definitely newer over the last decade. So I think that's where we're seeing a lot of that growth is you talk about lenses a lot, and putting a specific lens that matches up with ESG really kind of escalates that to the next level.
And thinking about ESG, so as we're moving into this and thinking about technology, but also incorporating an ESG or sustainability policy within the organization, here's 3 points on how to lead with each of them. So by leading with those environmental initiatives, you're saving on costs and gaining through a focused efficiency. Focusing on the social components, you're creating a more desirable work environment, as I alluded to earlier, differentiating yourself for the workforce, providing, if you're investing in technology, an environment that shows it's investing in its own future and the future of those employees that are coming in. And with high standards of governance, you're going to benefit with a positive public image and be prepared for some other things that are coming along that I'm going to get to on the next slide. And over here on the right is just a quote from Gardner from about a year ago, talking about ESG and sustainability as a competitive differentiator. And there's another stat from Accenture. They've had a few over the years and have done some massive studies calculating the difference between organizations that are sustainability and ESG focused versus ones that are not. And reading all these different studies from Accenture, McKinsey, Gartner, IDC, all of those thought leaders out there, one of the key things that I take away from it at the very high level is that if you're able to create that organization and have that thought leadership within your organization to lead with sustainability, to lead with ESG, that thoughtfulness that you put into it carries and cascades throughout the organization and really sets the tone for everybody in the organization to think about their different functions in that way, that thoughtful way. So when you're thinking about quality, I think that contributes to a culture of quality and being planned and having a really concrete approach and a thoughtful approach. And moving on, one of the most important things with having this thoughtful approach and being ahead of the game and thinking about competitively differentiating is different regulations that are in the pipeline right now. So you can see here on the left side of the screen, the SEC regulations that will be coming out likely in the beginning of 2023. And they are going to require financial level reporting on sustainability and ESG goals that are made public by large organizations. They'll be incorporated into the 10K to quantify how companies specifically are getting to their net zero goals, so that they're not putting statements out there that are not backed by facts. On the right side, lower side, you can see one recent regulation passed in the last couple of weeks in the EU with similar mandates, and another one is in the pipeline in probably the beginning of 2023. Now, these are the biggest, most major ones that are on the forefront of conversation right now. And there are many more globally that are in the pipeline to be aware of. And if you're a business out there that thinks, oh, well, this is just for the large organizations that are public, that are held to higher standards, those large organizations are going to be held accountable to those scope 3 emission standards. And if you are part of their chain of supply, even if you're all the way at the bottom and you're a third, fourth, fifth tier piece of that chain, they're going to come down and they're going to ask what your emissions are because they need to report on them. And I think later we're going to talk about some of the ways this can be achieved, because that's a large ask of an organization that might not be prepared for it, either with the data or financially to make that transition. But I think there are different things we can talk to get prepared for it, particularly with adopting the right technology to grab that data and get yourself prepared. Now, transitioning as you're thinking about connecting with that ESG and sustainability, there are two ways that we like to think about it. There's the personal and there's the technical. So again, we already touched on driving that sense of purpose within your employees, within your organization, which fosters engagement. So they're more tied into what they're doing and more motivated to be their best and leverage that technology in an optimal way. And Tony, I know we've talked so much about this connection of the personal and the technical, and especially those 4.0 technologies. Could you touch on that a little more? It's a few of those talking points we went through yesterday.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things is making sure that across the board accessibility is really key, and that starts from the personal side, making sure that the operators, the people on the plant floor, the people throughout the corporation have a voice. They have an effective way of communicating and expressing their concerns or their findings or their deficiencies on the plant floor. So making sure that there's basically some sort of suggestion system or best ideas and practices that can be communicated through a best practices and continuous improvement methodology. And then taking that into the technical aspect of using technical parts and pieces to basically measure and get the metrics real time to see what the impact is. So collecting data real time from those systems, aggregating, and then again, most importantly, providing good context around that. Data isn't too useful to the people that are reading unless you've got good context. So I think that's one of the things that we've been focusing on very strictly over the last couple of years is really simplifying and expressing contextually that information so people can take action on it very effectively.
And talking about that real time, I know when you and I have talked to some customers, we've talked about tying in that purpose with the real-time data by having maybe a screen per line showing the real-time data so they can see their impact. Could you touch on that briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough if you're working in a vacuum and you're just kind of doing your repetitive process or your operations without any sort of indication of how well you're performing, how much scrap you're producing, and again, providing that context. So maybe it isn't just parts and pieces that are scrapped, but there's maybe there's a carbon weighing to it, or a dollar cost, or a landfill impact. So what's kind of cool is we can do calculations that we can put into it to present, and it can give that context. So it's more relatable. Sometimes it doesn't mean much if your OEE rate is 53% or your pieces made is 13%. But if you can actually see that there's 2 trucks full of waste that are going to a landfill today from your work center, that may have a little bit better impact on you and allow you to use that information and take some action off that. So again, I think it's about empowering people to see exactly what their impact is and how they can take action on it.
And leading from your last point there about being able to see it, thinking about the systems that are going to pull this data together and help you understand. So in the report, we asked what software systems helped companies understand the data, pull the data to achieve their ESG and sustainability goals. And the top rank here, I don't think are a surprise to anybody, a QMS system focusing on quality and tracking, tracing, and your manufacturing execution system, which is going to oversee your whole plant floor. Tony, I know you always have some really great thoughts on the visibility that these provide. Could you mind sharing now?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about, one of the things that we're trying not to do is we're trying not to overburden people with plowing in information into all of these different disparate systems. So one of the things that we've done very well is take these seemingly disparate systems and be able to put them into an effective stack, a relational stack, so you can see how quality affects your manufacturing execution system. You can see how your supply chain and your ordering is impacting everything. You can see how your real-time production is impacting your forecast and how far behind and how much waste that you're creating that's related. So what we've been finding is so much of this is interrelated, and with disparate systems and siloed information, you can't really relate and get that context. So one of the things that we've done very special at Plex is to provide that stack in one available place to make all of those hidden relationships exposed, and again, be able to start taking action on that with the proper context.
Yeah, and that connection seems to be more and more important. I was at the North American Food Safety and Quality Summit in September, and the FDA presented there, a few others presented, and we're talking about the importance of technology connecting outside of the four walls to your suppliers, to your customers, so that you're able to streamline your production, understand when raw materials are coming in, and talk up and down the line about when deliveries might be made, and also adapt your orders in real time so you're not overstocking and ending up with any of that waste. But having these systems that connect can make such a difference. And I think that's one of those driving factors that helps so much with sustainability and ESG when you're making those policies and thinking about what does that mean for us to have an efficient production, and having the visibility into the data. And that leads nicely into steps to sustainability. How do we get there? There's technologies out there, Tony, as you just mentioned. Thinking about the technologies, are they connected? You don't want these siloed systems that don't communicate. You can have all the technologies in the world, but if people can't communicate within it, can't achieve the results of visibility and control that they're looking for, it's not that helpful. So having a conscious approach to the technology that you're using or adopting can make a huge difference. And the great news that's come out of the research that I've done over the last 2 years with the State of Smart Manufacturing report and all the iterations of the report looking back at the data is one of the things Tony talked about earlier, that the barriers to entry are lowered. The durability of the different hardware is higher, the cost of it is lower, and the software out there you can now find different entry points. Tony, would you mind touching on that a little more?
And I might even scale that a little bit beyond that. Is one of the things that we really spend a lot of time doing is taking a look at what existing legacy investments have already been made, and can we take advantage of that? Can we kind of up the ante and get additional richer information out of those systems, make that available to the business systems, make that available to the dashboards and the visualizations and the context. And then where we do have gaps, to your point, the availability of cost-effective, dynamic and agile technologies make it easier than ever to be able to kind of fill in those gaps and get visibility on that piece of equipment that's a half a mile in the back of your plant that nobody's seen or heard from in a decade, but getting real-time visibility of what's going on with that operation and how well it's performing and how much waste it's creating. So these technologies have really removed a lot of the obstacles that we've had.
And thinking about the technologies of today, so this is again some of the feedback from our 2022 report on leveraging innovation and technology to address workforce challenges, to better understand and manage your supply chain. And on the right side of this slide are some of the technologies that you've worked closely with for decades, Tony. Could you give us a couple examples of how these are being tied in? Any case study type thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's about that that accessibility of information. So whether it's a press that you're tracking how much production is coming out of that machine, how much waste is coming out of that, or if it's where you're tracking boilers or compressed air or infrastructure throughout the facility that are considered peripheral but have significant cost. Are those running after, at the end of the day? How many of your machines are still running? How many compressors are still running? Is heat still running? Are all of your exhaust fans running 24 hours a day? So those are things that we like to get visibility on and start taking, basically getting an action plan and stepping that up a little bit higher layer. One of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to add additional burden to operators and supervisors that have to go around and collect all this information. So a lot of what we do is try to look at how do we automate a lot of those processes? How do we simplify? How do we move all of that information and get context without overburdening any of the operators? With these smaller workforces, that's been a huge focus, and we've seen a lot of success in making things a lot easier and a lot more visible without destroying the operators.
Yeah, building from your point, one of the things I've seen out there is the conversation around data and talking about having so much data, but not being able to do anything with it, having your machines collect all this information and not be able to put it out in an intuitive way to really understand in real time and make decisions. And on this next slide, we have one great example of what it can look like. And Tony, would you mind talking through this particular example?
Yeah, so this is one of our kind of entry-level type solutions. Again, we have a lot of customers. There's a lot of companies out there that really don't have visibility into any of their equipment. We visit a lot of manufacturing facilities that have no networks in place, no software. They're relying on whiteboards to have an idea of how well they're performing and hoping at the end of the month that they have some good visibility into what's happening. What we like to do is we like to get basically a high velocity solution in there that can quickly be connected and provide instant visibility, real time, cycle by cycle. Every piece that's being made, exactly how well you're performing. If that equipment isn't performing at the best rate that it can. We can tell if it's down, if it's up, if it should be running, how efficiently it's running, and then even things like tracking scrap. And if you look at the middle right, you'll see 6 big losses. And again, we talk about context, and instead of just saying, we scrapped this many pieces, we start getting into reasons around why those were scrapped and really how many pieces and lost opportunity that was. So again, we focus on a lot of, how can we provide the most effective context as easily and simple as possible for our end users.
Tony and Gerry, if I can just jump in for a minute, because you've touched on the workforce development and the amount of data that's being collected from the smart manufacturing. So touching on both of those, with the workforce development, in addition to that, do you see smart manufacturing also supporting job creation? And perhaps that's job creation is around the enormous amount of data that's now being collected as a result of the technologies that's being implemented. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yes, that is a great question. So out of our 2023 report, we actually specifically asked about that, and 89% of the respondents see technology as creating new jobs or repurposing the jobs they have. I think it was about 35 or 40% looked at it as creating new jobs, and another quarter, I think, was repurposing. But most of it was that vast majority of about 90% thinking about how it can advance the organization and make more compelling roles for the people that are there. So upskilling the people within your organization and upskilling the jobs where you're bringing people in, and technology being a critical tool for training people up with knowledge retention and onboarding quickly. Oh, speaking of onboarding, Tony, you and I have talked so much about onboarding over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and it's, really what's been interesting to watch, and this has been true, one of the reasons that we went through with the acquisition with Plex is really kind of the democratization of the worker. With Plex and their stack and with our products, what we've seen is the ability to take, people from all different walks of life and really enable them. So whether they were somebody that was maintaining a server, and now, since servers are taken care of in the cloud, they can focus on, being business analysts. And we see people that were on the shop floor that were, just taking care of, production, that are suddenly enabled to start, taking that information, become, production leaders. And then, from to Gerry's point on onboarding, one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is, we talk a lot about simplification and context. And that's really true, especially as a lot of companies have a lot of turnover, is making sure that you have kind of a normalized environment that allows agility for new people to come in, that don't have to have, only Bob can run this machine and only Gerry can run this machine. And if one of those guys is gone, those machines don't run. So what we do is we kind of normalize some of those environments to allow them to operate and see how things are performing throughout that. So definitely some tools that really kind of let our customers and their operators, their supervisors, their management, use those tools to kind of escalate to the next level and add a whole new layer of value. So it's been a lot of fun to see that.
And such a great question to lead into this next section, thinking about the technology, the people, your internal processes. How is manufacturing going to change in the next 5, 10, 15 years? And how are you positioning your business to succeed and meet the needs of the next 5, 10, 15 years? So before I jump into this, building off of what I just said, we're going to talk a little bit about us, just to give a bit of an introduction. I want to say that in advance, but I also want to say one of the biggest things that's shown up in last year's report and this year's report is technology paralysis. And technology paralysis, as it's defined within our report, is that there's so many choices out there that people are deciding not to make a choice. It's too hard to make a choice, so it gets punted to next quarter or next year when you have more time to slow down and think about it. But then, do you ever really have time to slow down and think about it and do more research? Or are you pushing yourself into a desperation situation where you realize, oh, technology right now, and we have to make a choice, and this is the choice because it's in front of us. So when you're thinking about technology choices, one of the things that we usually default to when talking through it is think about organizations that are out there. So some have been out for a couple of years and they may have a newer solution and it may have lots of bells and whistles and seem fantastic as a fit. But is this organization going to be here for the long haul? When you think about Tony and Coors Engineering was around from the 70s and has this wealth of experience, went through the pains of figuring out how things work, how it fits just right, and come to today for decades of that experiential learning. And Plex, one of the first companies in the cloud, sorry, plugged myself, but thinking about companies that are there and have originated in these technologies back in the early 2000s before anybody knew what it was besides clouds in the sky. Anyway, so I'll move forward. So for Rockwell, as an organization, it's really right there to connect IT and OT and be there now, tomorrow, and in the future, and thinking about the needs of the future. And when you're looking at the organization as it is now, this is an image over the ISA 95 framework, which we think about a lot in terms of how manufacturers are going to think of solutions and how they plug into their facility. Tony, I know you really like this slide. Would you mind talking through a couple of the key points here?
And I think it was, one of the things, as you mentioned, we had been around since the 70s doing facility and industrial automation and connectivity. And, there was always that challenge of finding that complete stack, if you will, from, you always hear about the shop floor to the top floor. So, when I was at Coors Engineering, we had gaps. So when I joined Plex, we filled a lot of those gaps with, some of the cloud, the storage, the MES, and all of those sophisticated business layers. And when we were acquired by Rockwell, I was equally as excited because we were aligning with a company that had such breadth in the shop floor from a hardware perspective and a software and a cloud perspective. So it's really exciting to be able to go in and be able to solve the challenges, no matter how deep or wide they go with the stack that we've got available to us.
Now we're getting near the end. This is one of the last slides with some of the data from the 2022 State of Smart Manufacturing report. Now, as you go towards making a technology adoption or upgrade or just next step in the process, the steps on the right side are just some high-level things to think about. Identifying your key stakeholders and agreeing on the greatest need. What we've found over the years is that there's a need that triggers an investigation into a technology that may help solve it. But when you bring stakeholders together across the organization and have everybody really talk through what the core issue is, there's more of a core issue. And when you dig deeper, if you get to that core and solve that, it can have that trickle down effect to solve the problem that came up, the problems that you didn't know about, and the problems that might come up down the road. So really bringing the right stakeholders together to have the conversation that'll direct you to the best, most complete solution and the biggest problem. Making the business case for investment if you bring everyone together. Research and select your solution in a thoughtful way with all those stakeholders being able to weigh in and see, and then design and deploy. So thoughtfully thinking about how it's going to connect within your organization and deploy, and also how is it going to scale? Thinking about the next 5, 10, 15 years, what else will come in? A few years ago, we were not talking as much about ESG and sustainability, and here we are presenting about it today, presenting reports that we weren't doing a few years ago, because we're seeing the conversation continue to evolve and the importance of it. So really thinking about the scale of your organization and how that's going to impact your stakeholders, your environment, and your people, and the processes that connect everything together. And manage change and drive adoption. So really tying back to people, because there is no technology, or maybe few technologies, that do not need a human touch. You need humans, that human element, to drive optimal use of technology, optimal implementation, and optimal connection throughout your ecosphere. And with that, here is our contact information. I know we're going to have questions, but I wanted to put this up here just so that you're able to reach out to Tony or I if you have any questions on this presentation. And my good friend Temba is on here. If you have just some general inquiries or thoughts around ESG and sustainability, you're looking for a starting point, you want somebody to talk to find out what kind of options are out there for you, Temba is amazingly knowledgeable, one of the friendliest people I've ever met, and so easy to talk to. So he is also a resource there to help you get connected to the information that you need. So thank you very much, and let's open for questions. And thank you, Laura.
That's great. Thank you so much. Really interesting insight from the report and the study that you did. And I found it really interesting to hear how the manufacturing industry is approaching sustainability, across operations and using technologies to get closer to their targets. We've got about 15 minutes left, and we've got some questions that have come in. I've got a couple of my own also, but I want to first go back. There's one, because it was one of the more recent slides that you went through, which was the OEE real time that Tony had talked about. And this question came in regarding that slide, asking how many sensors and other real-time inputs are required to enable the type of feedback that Tony had mentioned.
Oh boy, do I love this question. I love a good softball like that. So Paul, I appreciate that wherever you're coming from. But so really one of the things that has been exciting is we've spent, again, a lot of what we've tried to do is invest in engineering things so our customers don't have to. So you don't have to go through and code and configure and get into a development environment to create these solutions in this context. So those screens that you saw, basically the only thing that we need is iCycled from the machine. So whether that's coming into an IoT appliance, or maybe you have 10 work centers in an island that you can collect into a small micro PLC or whatever it may be. All we really need is iCycled. If we have more information, if we have downtime reasons, if we have scrap reasons, there's more information that we can do. We can get, even all the way into job setup and configuring machines and rates and those types of things. But at minimum, all we need is iCycled. And your next question gets into is Ethernet IP. The best network. Generally, we love wired networks, and as far as protocols, we do include the Kepler manufacturing suite. So that allows us to talk to well over 100 different makes and models and protocols that are out there. To Gerry's point about as you're going into the selection process and making sure that you've got a good solution, always want to be thinking about open architecture and non-proprietary type solutions that you can make sure it's going to address today's needs as well as future needs. So if we have that open architecture, then you're prepared as that new equipment comes in, as you do new features and functions, that platform's ready for that.
That's great. Thanks for answering both of Paul's questions there. We also had a question that came in from Trisha, and it was towards the beginning, and I think it's referencing or came in around the time that you were talking about the scope 1, 2, and 3. And she's touching here on that sort of the scope 3. So her question is, do you have a strategy for engaging your supply chain to be partners in meeting your goals? And if so, what has worked?
Communication, number one. So identifying what types of asks there might be, what types of impact there might be from regulations, from whatever you're thinking top of mind. Communication is the starting point, and then thinking about, if you are a large organization, you need your suppliers to be on board, and if they need assistance, is there a way that you can help? And that might be a co-investment, it might be a loan. I'm not an expert here on this particular part of the topic, but I have read different case studies about how to make it work and how quickly the pressure might come down should this rule pass in the US, and the implications for the EU rule seem pretty widespread. I was reading a case study from Harvard Law last night talking about how the EU rule could impact 50,000 companies within the US. So it's far and wide, and the best opening is open lines of communication to start talking now. And by doing that, maybe the different people within your supply chain already have knowledge, in more knowledge than you may have, so that knowledge share can be extremely helpful.
And if I can pile on a little bit, so a couple of additional ways that we can do it from a little bit of a metrics-based opportunity is we do have basically a built-in supplier scorecard within Plex. So we can build out, some of the what builds out that score, whether that is, a lot of it is based on-time delivery, but we can expand that into additional metrics as far as distance and other metrics that may call out the type of equipment that they're delivering with, the type of delivery schedules and other things that could impact that. And then additionally, as we get our supply chain tools are getting more and more powerful, so those metrics can start to be built in. So those can be calculated as part of, as you're determining which supplier to pick your parts from. You can have, additional metrics that can contribute to. It's not just about price. It's not just about if they can deliver on time, but we can add additional factors into things that relate to sustainability and ESG.
And have you seen a lot of manufacturers starting to incorporate that with their supply chain?
I'm a little bit disconnected from the plant floor side. I haven't seen it personally, but I know it's as Gerry's report is calling out, it's definitely becoming higher and higher on everybody's radar.
Yeah, for sure, and especially with the regulations and reporting requirements coming out. One question I had for you on that, and with the engagement you've had with the manufacturers, with the new ESG regulations and reporting requirements that we can expect to see in the future, do you think, from your perspective, most manufacturers are ready for this? And particularly manufacturers in the Great Lakes region, if you can speak to sort of the regional setting.
In my general research, I think it is going to take a lot for many organizations to be ready for it. And I think some of it might be the wait and see until it actually happens, being a catalyst for action. And keeping general, the best advice I could give is proactive is going to put you in a better competitive position. From the 2023 report findings that I'm working through now, a huge takeaway was organizations talking about technology as a competitive differentiator. That response rose 65% year over year, from about a quarter of organizations saying that they lack the technology to compete, to almost 50% of organizations, 50, saying that they lack the technology to compete. And it's not just ESG and sustainability. There's so many other reasons to make sure that you are prepared for the future through your technology adoption. And then, Tony, I'm sure you have more thoughts here.
Yeah, and it just like anything, it's an investment. So there's a balance between, as Gerry said, kind of a little bit of wait and see of what are the regulations going to be coming out. And, I think there's fear about investing too far into one direction and finding out that there may be some other metrics or methodologies that are required. But there is a common interest. Everybody's interested in reducing energy. Everybody's interested in capturing, emissions. Everybody's trying to realize that, all of those things are more related than we thought in the past. As we run equipment and we see high emissions, that's typically an expression from the equipment that things aren't running well. If we see high voltages, high currents from the equipment, those are expressions, again, that things could be running better. Maybe bearings are out of place or equipment isn't running. So everybody's starting to finally gel in that, all of this sustainability and things that are running clean and running well are all impacting the quality of our products, the quality of our work environments, the quality of our operators. All of these things are all so intertwined. So the better that we can start measuring and tracking those types of things, the better that we can start taking action. And to Gerry's point, being proactive and ready for what's coming down the future.
Right, absolutely. Okay, great. Well, there's another question that I want to see if you're able to answer that came in from one of our audience members, and it's regarding ESG investing. Some state governments are considering making ESG investing illegal. They reference South Carolina and Florida, which is outside of the Great Lakes region, but still something that's been in discussion, obviously, and we're hearing about in the news. And but can you, I guess, speak to or offer any insights on these potential policy initiatives regarding ESG?
Yeah, and, from our approach, our tools aren't explicitly designed around ESG or delivery of a form factor that fits exactly into ESG. Kind of what's interesting is the results of the data that we collect and the real-time information that we have kind of propagate and support people that are interested in pursuing those things. So whether it's on an environmental side where we can show that we're reducing energy, or a social side to say that, we're actively collecting employee suggestions, or on a governance side where we're providing because we're collecting all this information, it's easy for us to deliver that information to governance. Our form factor isn't, we're not to kind of complying to a very specific set of things, but everything that we collect and support kind of supports those initiatives. So it's even if those the ESG as it's classically defined, we still support all of those things that make a better work environment, address governance, and make things more sustainable. So those are things that people are looking for anyway. So whether there's a very specific contained metric around that or not, we still help support those initiatives.
Yeah.
Just if I could mention two more. So we typically focus on higher level ones, but health and safety is another thing that's tracked within the system, and materials purchasing, which could end up cutting out waste and saving so much money. There was another case study that I was looking at recently where just understanding that this is for a much larger one of the largest organizations, for glove prices, they were paying all over the board at different plants, like $5, $13 for the same pair. And when they were able to streamline that and understand, putting like one single source system, single source of truth, they saved about $1 billion. So even on a small scale, things like that can make such a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for adding that. Absolutely. The topic of ESG investing, I think that's a webinar in itself that we might have to, might visit in 2023. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thank you, Gerry and Tony, for your time and the conversation on ESG and smart manufacturing. And of course, for breaking down the State of Smart Manufacturing report for us. It's really an interesting report. And so I would encourage anyone who has not had the chance to read it or review the report to download it. The link has been provided in the chat box. So I hope you've all had a chance to click on that. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today and contributed with your questions. They've been great. And I also invite companies and business leaders to join our business and sustainability network and the sector dialogues that are addressing issues critical to ensuring a healthy and prosperous Great Lakes region. And with that, thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day and happy holidays ahead.